but beach staining catch 200 in 5 minutes. So for simplicity's sake.
So you move the fish from the control tank to the experimental tank. Is there any sort of acclimation, or do they go right from fresh water to 30 bucks?
Great question. So the question was regarding acclimation protocol for these fish. So I had them in large holding tanks, held at their, well, for the optimal temperature, held at that respective temperature for, it was close to a month in large holding tanks. They were then separated into the different experimental and control tanks randomly, which all started at 0 parts per thousand. And then they were acclimated in those tanks for a week before the salinity levels started to increase 3 parts per thousand every week.
Okay, so our next speaker is Ashley Morris of our own New York State DEC, and she's going to be talking to us about the threat of northern snakehead to New York water bodies, which again, also near and dear to my heart. So I'm worried they're going to eat some of my rare fish. So I will let Ashley tell you all about it.
Yeah, not quite our favorite invasive species, but I'm sure it's close second. So yeah, I will be talking about northern snakehead in New York, specifically kind of southern New York, where we're managing them. I am going to take a quick second to acknowledge Stephen Pearson, who has done the bulk of this work that I'll be presenting here. I just started working for the DEC in April of this last year. So this has been a long time coming with this project. So northern snakehead, for those of you who don't know, very invasive fish. It's native to Asia and areas around that, and has been introduced into the United States in several different locations. Those introductions can happen several different ways. They have all been, to our knowledge, purposeful introductions. So whether that's aquarium dumps or cultural introductions, some people release living species into the water for cultural reasons, or sport fish releases. Snakehead is notoriously a fun fish to catch. And so that means people want to be able to catch them in New York water bodies, and so they put them in there, and it causes quite the issue. And then those fish are able to spread around naturally as well once they've gotten into a water body. So some of the ecology behind snakehead, they're very tolerant to salinity. They're fine with stagnant water, silty water, mucky water, barely any water. They're very resilient. They're very fecund. And they're a generalist species, which makes them, pretty dangerous to the native species that are existing in the water with them. They're quite large and have a varied diet, so they can eat zooplankton, small insects, crustaceans. The smaller snakehead will eat smaller fish. The adults will eat fish up to a third of their length, and they can get pretty long. So these are fish that will eat other large fish within the environment as well. The life history in its native range varies from its introduced range, which is interesting. Unfortunately, we get the shorter end of that stick. In its native range, they will reach sexual maturity at about 2 years. As I mentioned, they're fairly fecund, which means they reproduce a lot. They can spawn anywhere from 1 to 5 times per year. They exhibit parental care, so they will have an adult fish guarding the young. And they will produce anywhere from 22,000 to 115,000 eggs per year. So that's a lot of potential new snakehead every year. And they live about a year years in the wild. And lucky us, there has been some evidence that in their introduced range, they actually reach sexual maturity in about 1 year. So that gives them 1 extra year of reproducing, causing a problem for us. Introductions into their new range. They've been introduced into several states throughout the Mid-Atlantic. We obviously focus on New York. And they have established pretty well in the Susquehanna and Delaware River, and that they've also gotten into a few different states around us as well. Specifically some of the history in New York for snakehead. We first saw them in Queens in 2005. They are present continually in that area and they're being monitored. We also had, which is wonderful to be able to say with invasive species, a past tense, a population in Orange County that was successfully eradicated with pesticide. You can see how many fish were potentially in that water body and we were actually able to get rid of. So, again, a rare positive for invasive species. And then in 2019, they got into, they were reported within, who knows when they actually got there, into the Delaware Basin and the river in 2019 and the Bashakill Wildlife Management Area in 2021. And there have also been unconfirmed reports in the Oswego and in the Hudson River, which we will go over the Hudson River in a second. So we get a lot of our reports and detections from anglers. So we got in 2019 a photo from a report from an angler with no photo. So not super, verifiable, but you can't really ignore these sorts of reports. So it was go time. Unfortunately, regional fisheries staff, so the Inland Fisheries Unit, along with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, came out and we did electrofishing, both night and day surveys to try to be able to catch, hopefully any snakehead that had been introduced into the water body. We also began to do eDNA sampling. So that was done within the DEC, and then also U.S. Fish and Wildlife provided a ton of support for that as well. They have this really cool mobile eDNA lab. It's very awesome. Sometimes they take it to conferences. You get to see inside. I've been inside of it. It's very cool. And so with that, we were able to take environmental DNA, which is just taking a water sample, running it through, in this case, it's a qPCR, and it basically gives you a yes or a no as to whether there is snakehead, in this case, in that particular area. In the case of 2019 and in the Hudson River, both the electrofishing surveys and the eDNA surveys yielded negative results, meaning that hopefully the angler was mistaken and he just caught something that looked like maybe it was a snakehead. In 2020, it was go time again, and this time we got a snakehead detection with a photo, and so that's a little bit more reliable, it's a little bit more scary for us, but this time it's in the Delaware River. Once again, Fisheries Unit went out, did some electrofishing. We have some lovely photos from them doing that, focusing on a lot of the oxbows and tributary mouths in the areas where snakehead are going to be likely to be hanging out and potentially spreading into new areas. At the same time, we also did more environmental DNA collections, and we tried to target those to be in close proximity to the e-fishing sites, because we really want to have matching, fish in hand, and then also a positive eDNA sample. That way they can kind of verify each other. And the results for this one is that the e-fishing and the eDNA were positive within the area of the reported detection, but then were negative in some other places as well. Hopefully showing a, at the time, relatively recent introduction. In 2021, moving right along, snakehead were detected in the Bashakill. Once again, this was an angler with a photo. We went, we did the e-fishing. Excellent, okay, great. We did the e-fishing, we did the environmental DNA sampling. This time we were able to do environmental sampling every 500 meters throughout a lot of that Bashakill wildlife management area. So you see these little blue dots are all the places that we took an environmental DNA sample, again, about 500 meter spacing, give or take a couple of meters, because sometimes it's hard to get a canoe in there. This time we had some interesting results in that we were not able to get a fish in hand, But we did get a decent amount of positive environmental DNA hits. And so all of these yellow circles here are detections, and then these little blue dots are no detections. So you can see in the southern part of this, the southern and central mostly, area of the Bashakil, there's a lot of detections for snakehead. All right, and then up toward that northern end, we started getting less of a trickle, more of a trickle of detections, less detections in general, which is good. So, we decided to also continue up and do some more environmental DNA sampling. This time we really want to figure out, instead of just trying to find out where the snakehead are, it's just as important for us to figure out exactly where they aren't yet. So we wanted to focus, we know they were in the Delaware, unfortunately they have established there, but to our knowledge they are not yet in the Hudson. And it became our mission to ensure that the snakehead do not naturally make it to the Hudson. If someone puts them in there, we can do less about that. But we're trying to prevent them from swimming their way in there. So importantly, there are wetland connections between the WMA and the Delaware Hudson Canal. And this is the Bashakil. So that's very confusing when you talk about it. So Bashakil is the wetland area, and Bashakil is this connection between the Hudson and Delaware. And so that is where we did most of our focus on this eDNA sampling. Once again, we went through, we sampled every 500 meters. This was a pretty massive collaborative effort, so I want to shout out DEC, Lower Hudson Prism, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife that have been absolutely instrumental in running these results for us, so show us whether or not we actually get hits. So the results, maybe, there we go. We went a couple of different times a year, so this is in the spring. To orient everybody, the little triangles are negative detections and the blue circles are positive detections. We, again, got repeated positives for eDNA within the wildlife management area, but very fortunately, got negative detections in that upstream portion, meaning that it's unlikely that they had been able to make it from the Delaware into the Hudson just yet. And there's our fall sampling in the Bashakil. You can see that there are some disjointed kind of positive detections, and we've been tracking those over time as well. But in this main stream section, there are all negatives right now, which is fantastic. At the same time that we were doing this, Inland Fisheries also helped us with doing end of the year surveys. A little over 2,000 in 2022, a little over 2,000 young of the year were netted and taken out of the Bashakil system, which is fantastic. They also were able to get one of the guarding adults in this survey as well. With that information that we've been able to get, where we kind of know the extent of the snakehead, we wanted to put in some hydrologic separation in between where the snakehead are and where the snakehead are not yet. And so we set our sights on the canal near Summitville, New York, which is where that Delaware-Hudson juncture is. In 2022, we installed DEC Fisheries, really went out there and put in the work and installed this temporary barrier. It's kind of just, basically a fence that goes through the water. It did a really good job for, about a year, but wasn't quite, set up to withstand the high water events that we saw in the following years. So in 2023, in November, we contracted out and got this absolutely lovely, more permanent but still temporary barrier that is going to prevent especially adults, but probably also younger snakehead from moving from the Bashakil area through the Bashakil into the Hudson. So this barrier is made with hillable piles that go into the ground, so it goes all the way to the bottom of the substrate. We don't get a lot of water flow through this area, so hopefully we don't get a lot of debris building up on either side.